All right, well, welcome to Christian Virtual Fellowship. I am the substitute teacher for tonight. Unfortunately, our brother Edgardo Cavino couldn't be with us tonight. He was scheduled to run fellowship and teach tonight, but he's dealing with some family matters. So with the death of his mother, and so he is not able to be here. But so we're going to have a discussion fellowship tonight. If you don't know what that is, it means that I'm going to introduce a topic. I've got a few little things to say about it, and then we're going to have more open discussion. It's sort of the reverse of how we typically do things. So normally we do 30 to 45 minutes of teaching, and then maybe 15 minutes to 30 minutes if there's a lot of discussion. And so we reverse it with a discussion fellowship where it's maybe 15 minutes tops of teaching, introduction of the topic, and then a longer amount of time for discussion. And I think with the topic that I have tonight, I think we should probably have quite a bit of discussion. I don't know how it will be here. I imagine that when we post the video online, it will generate all kinds of discussion. Some really good, some maybe not so good. And you don't have to be out of the picture. So we're super informal here at Christian Virtual Fellowship. We are just family, and so that's why, for example, we don't edit these videos. They're just the way that they are, and as if you were here when we held it. So, all right, what I'm going to do first is I'll tell you what the topic is tonight, and then I'm going to share my screen. We're going to look at the Bible for a few minutes because I'm going to go through a few sections of Scripture to begin with. So I want to talk tonight about the Sabbath and observing the Sabbath, and what that means for us is first of all, is it a law or requirement for Christians to observe the Sabbath? Is it, if so, how should we observe it? Is there a particular day, that sort of thing? And it's not super cut and dry subject. But I think there's definitely some things in the Scripture that speak to some of the questions, at least. And certainly there's a lot of opinions about it in Christianity, and so I think it's a good topic to talk about and kind of kick around a little bit. And maybe tonight there'll be some questions that we haven't thought about before. Somebody will have a question or a thought about it that might be something that you listening later might have never thought about. And so and I would like to say this at the beginning too. If you're watching or listening to this recording later, we definitely invite you to join the discussion. Wherever you're actually seeing it, whether that's on YouTube or Facebook or wherever it happens to be, definitely get in and post your comments. We'd love to hear from you. All right, so let me share my screen.
Green.
I'm not used to seeing it. I'm used to already done this, and I'm looking for something different. All right. And I'm going to share this. All right. Can everybody see my Logos Bible software? Yes. Okay, good. Let's see. I gotta move this just a little bit. There we go. Okay, so we're going to start off in Genesis chapter 2, and we'll see in verse 1. And this is an interesting chapter break where it gets done with the sixth day, and then we have a chapter break, and we're going to talk about the seventh day, and then we're going to do a new account down here in verse 4, talking more specifically about Adam and Eve in the garden. So it's kind of a weird chapter break, but in verse 1, it says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their hosts. By the seventh day, God completed his work, which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work, which he had done." And this is generally recognized as the institution of the seventh day of rest, a Sabbath day of rest. And so we see that initially in the creation account in Genesis, that this idea of resting on the seventh day. Then when we go to Exodus chapter 20, we find the Ten Commandments, and we find that the fourth commandment is actually about the Sabbath and Sabbath rest. And so in verse 8, it says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Holy generally meaning, set apart. It's dedicated and set apart. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of Yahweh, the Lord, your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle, or your sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So we see in the Ten Commandments that again, this idea of a seventh day of rest, a 7-day week, and on the last day of the week, the seventh day, where the Israelites in this Mosaic covenant were supposed to rest. Then looking at Isaiah, this is an interesting thing, I think, to look at. In Isaiah 58, we have an interesting account where the what's happening is God is instructing the coming Messiah about what to preach, and so this is in that section where they first of all, he has them preaching to the people of God about the fact that their religious service and observance is not what he's really looking for, and he wants, and they talk about fasting in here, and they really weren't serving God in the way that he wanted. They were being wicked and sinful and stuff like that. They were oppressing people, and he wanted them to fast so their prayers could get answered in a way that he wanted, which was to get sin out of your life and to take care of others, to take care of the needy, the hungry, the homeless, and so on and so forth. And if they would do that, he would answer their prayers. And so in other words, if they would obey his commandments, not about the sacrifices and all that kind of stuff, but the core commandments of those 10 commandments, plus, there's one in Leviticus that Jesus points out, love your neighbor as yourself. And he says that sums up all of it, really. And then in Deuteronomy 6, I believe, we find the great commandment, love the Lord your God. So at the end of this, we find, and one thing to understand is the Isaiah, and if you want more on Isaiah, I'm teaching on an Isaiah series. We're going to be getting into, I believe, the third installment this coming month. I talk a lot more about Isaiah as the gospel, the first book of the Bible that's actually covering the gospel. And there's a ton about the gospel, including that Gentiles would be brought in and be saved through the Messiah and his work and all that kind of stuff. But here at the end of chapter 58, we see this. If because of the Sabbath you turn your foot from doing your own pleasure on my holy day and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy day of the Lord honorable, and honor it, desisting from your own ways, from seeking your own pleasure and speaking your own word, then you will take delight in the Lord, and I will make you ride on the heights of the earth, and I will feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. So we see a principle going on here that he's, he instituted this Sabbath day rest to begin with. He's given the Israelites through their covenant very specific instructions. And then in Isaiah, in this section, he's speaking to the Messiah and what this Messiah is going to be teaching, again, to the people of God. And included in that is the observance of the Sabbath day rest, that, doing this in the right way, which is, not doing it in your own way. All right. And then the next thing I wanted to look at is here in Matthew chapter 5, we find something interesting. And where am I here? No, I think I've moved it down a little bit. Here we go. Verse 17. Do not think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. And I think a lot of times people take that but to fulfill as in somehow it's like he's going to fulfill the requirements of the law in some way where now the law, like as if it says, I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill them so that they don't apply anymore.
I came to fulfill, so to abolish.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense, right? No, he came to do them right and to show us how to do them right. Right? That's what he's saying there. In fact, the whole next section is where he goes into specific laws and shows us how to do them properly. So, this is in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, right? This is something that Matthew put into his gospel for Christians to understand Jesus's teachings for us. And so one of the things is he's telling us he's not abolishing the law. He's showing us the right way to do it. One of the things, and I have more on this in the Gospel Foundation class that's on the Allegiance to the King YouTube channel. It's one of the playlists, and I highly recommend that you go through that. If you're liking our videos and stuff like that, definitely go through that class. It's a foundation that I believe really every Christian needs to reset, because we've had so much junk taught about the gospel in church history that we've really strayed from what the gospel really is, which is the kingdom of God. But one of the things I talk about in that class is the idea that the commandments, those 10 commandments, are actually separate from all of those other laws. We tend to talk about them like they're laws. They're not. There's a different word that's used of all of the observances that they had. And I remember reading one scholar writing about it that I thought had a pretty good way of picturing it, which is that the commandments are like the law that the legislature makes, and then all the 10 commandments, and then all of these other things, those are like regulations that the regulatory bodies make. So, there's a law about, in the United States, the legislature makes a law about wireless communication, but then the Federal Communications Commission actually implements that law, and they'll have regulations associated with the law, but those regulations aren't the law itself. It's just how that law is being implemented. And the Jews have always seen the 10 commandments and the rest of the things with this relationship of those 10 commandments. And again, you've got the commandment in Deuteronomy. The 10 commandments are the actual law, God's law. And then all these other things are ways in which that law is being implemented in that society at the time that God wanted to. But God can come along and change that stuff. And certainly he did change that stuff when he had the Babylonians come in and destroy Jerusalem, because they couldn't do all the temple worship anymore. But they still had to obey those commandments. So in here, this is an important point, is Jesus, when he's asked, like the rich young ruler, for instance, what must I do to be saved? And he says, keep the commandments. And then he rattles off a few of the 10 commandments, right? Well, that's the way we need to think about the law at its core form, is the commandments that God has given to us that then we under that covenant are supposed to obey. So, for example, there's a covenant with all of mankind, this creation covenant with Adam and Eve that was modified under Noah in Genesis chapter 9. That applies to every human being on the planet. And the things that go into that, including civil government and food law, what is okay for us to eat, what's not okay for us to eat, that kind of thing, that we're not supposed to eat blood, for instance. That applies to every human being. And so that's the law. And then all this other stuff is implementations of it in different ways that are sometimes are necessary for us to understand in a particular society that we have. And so they had complex ways of implementing that in the books of Moses, so that they could actually carry out the core of the law in their society. Okay, last place I want to look at here. This is in John 15, where Jesus says, let's start with verse 4. Back up a little bit. Abide in me, and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, so neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me, and I in him, he bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away as a branch and dries up, and they gather them and cast them into the fire, and they are burned. So this abiding in him, this is a big deal, right? You're either doing it or you're not doing it. If you're doing it, then great. He's with you, you're with him, it's all good. If you're not abiding in him, if you're not remaining in him, then you're going to be cast off and burned up. And he's addressing this, right, to the disciples. This is not addressed to the world at large. This is addressed to the disciples. Then in verse 7, it says, if you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. Just as the Father has loved me, I have also loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. Okay, so wait a minute. Jesus is saying, I have kept my Father's commandment, therefore I am abiding in his love. I, Jesus, have turned around, I have given you commandments, including what he says to the rich young ruler, what must I do to be saved? Well, keep the commandments, right? And then he rattles off, pieces of the 10 commandments. And but here he's added a commandment. He says, I give you a new commandment in John 13:34. And in verse 12, we see that commandment. This is my commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends. So we see there's indicators, like there's not a place in the New Testament where you go and it says, keep the Sabbath holy kind of stuff. Maybe some hinting at it, but nothing so stark as, say, Exodus 20, for instance. But it also appears that the law has not been done away with. Certainly the regulations have been done away with, but the law itself has not been done away with. And if you think about that for a minute, the 10 commandments, if we set aside the commandment about the Sabbath for a minute, which of the other commandments are set aside under the new covenant? Is murdering not a commandment anymore? No. What about coveting? What about adultery? What about stealing? What about honoring your father and mother? You don't need to honor your father and mother anymore. How about, that God is our God, that Yahweh is our God, and that we're supposed to worship him, and we're not supposed to worship idols, and we're not just supposed to take his name in vain. Every other one of the 10 commandments, I think every Christian would agree, yes, we need to keep those commandments. But commandment number 4 is not a commandment anymore. I don't know about that. And the fact that God instituted that as part of what he was doing in creation, it seems to me that this commandment still applies. But then that opens up a whole, group of questions. Okay, well, if it does apply, how do we observe it now? We don't necessarily observe it the way the Jews observed it under the law, under the Mosaic covenant, right? That's that they had certain things they were supposed to do on the Sabbath and not do on the Sabbath. I don't know that everything that was in those regulations would necessarily apply to us. Is there some things that would apply to us that didn't apply to them? So how should we observe this commandment? And then also, and one of those big questions, okay, well, what day? What what day should we observe it? And I'm gonna close my introduction here with a comment about that. I'll give you my 2 cents on that. I'll lay my cards on the table. I do believe that we should observe the Sabbath. I believe we should observe it by resting and dedicating that day to God. I don't believe that we have any real strict regulations beyond, just a day of making sure that we're resting and that we're there was a part of the law under Moses was you couldn't make your servants work on those days either. And that's something that I've pondered about. If I go to a restaurant on Sunday, am I making somebody work on Sunday? I think that's an interesting and good question. And so I do believe that Sunday in the Western world, at least, in modern times, is the appropriate day. And this is why I say not Saturday, because if you go back into the Bible, we looked at the relevant sections. There's nothing about Saturday. There's nothing about Sunday. It says the seventh day of the week. And so I don't know about you, but the seventh day of the week where I live is Sunday. It's not Saturday. In fact, we even refer to it that way. We say that the first 5 days of the week, that's the weekdays, Monday through Friday. And then we call Saturday and Sunday the week end. And the last day of the week end is Sunday. And so if what we are supposed to do is observe the seventh day of the week as a day of rest, well, then Sunday would be the day for probably most of us. So those are some of my, my cards on the table. I certainly, this is a discussion fellowship. I'm not, I am definitely open to, somebody going, hey, John, I don't think you've considered this or that. And in either direction, either moving away from, Sabbath observance or more towards Sabbath observance. I just want to be pleasing to God. And so, all right, so I'm going to stop sharing. And open it up for questions and thoughts. Yes, Jackson.
I feel like you and I talked about this before and had our own little mini debate because what's curious to me is how, Orthodox Jews are so set on Sabbath being like, sundown, is it sundown Friday night?
That's how they observe their days. The day begins at sundown and goes until the next sundown.
Yeah. And so I'm curious, like I said, I think we've had this discussion before and I'm just having vague memory of it. Old Saturday, according to that, versus Sunday thing. I'm like torn on because, and we talked about this before, where on the calendar, not that means anything. Sunday still shows as the first, even though we know, like you said, it's the weekend, but functionally it's the weekend. So I'm just kind of curious in the sense of like, how do we know what the first day of the week was in the beginning? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think there's any way to know that because we don't have any. I did some research into this a couple of years ago, and what I found was that it was the Jews that introduced the 7-day week to the world, and there's been lots of other, there's some societies didn't have anything like a week, and they would do like lunar observance and stuff like that. Some have done a different kind of week, like a 10-day and stuff like that. And throughout history, what has been the reason why the world works on a 7-day week now is because that is, for whatever reason, I don't think they even really understand why, that is the best system. And in fact, Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union, he wanted to move as far away from Christianity and that sort of thing in the Bible as possible in his atheism. And so he instituted in the Society of the Soviet Union a different, he got away from a 7-day week, and I don't remember how many, it may have been 10 days, I'm not sure. And that was this cycle, and he moved away from a seventh day of rest to this sort of rotating kind of thing.
I remember you talking
And
about this.
it was an utter disaster in their society. And a little around a decade later, after that experiment had failed miserably, they went back to a 7-day week, and it fixed all the problems.
Yeah, wasn't it something like they were actually like scheduling people so they didn't even have time together within families and stuff like
Yeah,
that?
it was that if people couldn't rest together, and they figured out that society works a lot better if people rest together, as opposed to you get a rest on this day and I get a rest on that day, and that sort of thing. Yeah.
That actually feels like it might be reflective of part of God's purpose unspoken in it.
I think that's almost certainly true. Okay, George.
Thank you so much, John. And this has definitely been the one commandment that I've often had a head scratcher, because it seems of all the commandments, the one that is most disregarded by Christians, and kind of Jesus' own accounts of Jesus, on his disciples walking through the fields on the Sabbath, or Jesus saying the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, seems to have given a basis for it to be extensively undermined. And then on top of that, Paul saying, some observe a day holy and others don't. And so it's definitely been a source of fundamental confusion about, is this an extinct out of the 10 commandments? And so is it even 9 commandments now? And so when then we hear Jesus say that we all need to, or talking to that man, obey the commandments. And while he says it's all fulfilled in, love your neighbor. First of all, Yahweh, our God, is one. Love him with all our heart, soul, and might, and then love our neighbors. Yeah, so it's been a gray area. That being said, it has also been a tension to me when almost among all the laws, well, there are a few where God is very emphatic, but we see with very strong clarity in the Old Testament where God reinforces the Sabbath and says, his rationale behind instituting it. And even when Israel went apostate, he brings back their attention to both justice and obedience and observing the Sabbath. So I'm just making this comments to say that it's been a gray area for me, compounded by Jesus seemingly discounting of it, which is then even further reinforced by Paul in saying, some days, kind of like don't die on this hill. And so I look forward to hearing what everyone has to say in how we can obey this as well as the other commandments without being legalistic, but also as God intended it. And then just one last comment is, there is later, I think, either in Hebrews or Peter, where it talks about Sabbath symbolically as, entering God's rest. So all of that just brings up the question of, is it now moved into a spiritual meaning? How do we observe the physical? There is clearly a physical benefit to it. Thank you.
Yeah, all good and interesting things, George. One of the things I've wondered about Paul's instruction is he talking about the Sabbath, or is he talking about other days? Because there were all these different, the Jews had a number of different days that they observed that don't seem to apply in the New Testament. They were certainly part of the implementation of the law, not the regulations, not the commandments themselves. And then, but even, was he even talking about those days, or was he talking about the holy days of the Roman Empire?
Mhm.
And is it that he's really getting into a discussion about making an issue of someone observing one of the Roman holidays, as opposed to the Sabbath itself. And I think there may be something going on with that, rather than Paul stating that, well, the Sabbath doesn't necessarily apply anymore, if that makes sense. But
Yeah, a quick addition to that is also when we see in Acts 15 thereabout the people who were demanding circumcision, and then the church had to make a response. And in Peter's address to the church, he says, why do we put, why suggest a heavy load that even we could not carry? And then they summarize what were the essentials to demand the Gentile believers to follow, and the Sabbath wasn't also included. So just throwing that also into the mix.
What's
Granted,
interesting? What's interesting, George, about what James addresses when he actually gives them, like one of the things he doesn't do is tell them to obey Jesus's commandment to love one another as I have loved you. And so what he does address that they need to obey, generally speaking, there's what he covers for the most part is actually in the Noahic covenant, the covenant with Noah. So he tells them not to eat blood, and that comes from Noah's covenant. What appears to me to be the case with James in Acts 15 is that they've decided, no, we're not going to make them keep all of these things that are under the Mosaic covenant, but they do need to observe the things that are under Noah's covenant. And actually, Paul is covering that in Romans 13 when he says that governing authority is a servant of God, and that also comes from Noah's covenant. And so it's like, the original covenant with Adam and Eve includes this observance. And so does that carry through then? Because it's not changed in Noah's covenant. And just for technical purposes, for somebody again, this is covered in the gospel class, that there's language in the Old Testament about when a new covenant is instituted. It has certain language. There's language that when a covenant is not being made new, but is instead being reaffirmed, it may be modified at that time, that sort of thing. And it's different language used for those two conditions. And in Genesis 9 with the Noah's covenant, it's renewal language. It's not new covenant language. It's not we're making a new covenant. It's we're going to take an existing covenant and we're going to make modifications to it, or just renew it. And so as opposed to the covenant made with the Israelites at Sinai, that's a new covenant. The covenant made with Abraham, that's a new covenant. The language there. But later, when it gets reaffirmed with Isaac and Jacob, it's renewal language, not new cutting of a covenant language. And so here's how I think about that. Okay, so the language associated with the covenant with Noah in Genesis 9 is the language of either renewing or modifying, in this case, modifying an existing covenant. And the situation of creation, there's no place that talks about creating a covenant in early Genesis chapters with a creation covenant, but everything that's happening is all covenantal stuff, right? And even marriage is instituted at that time, and it's not called a covenant. It's not called a covenant until Malachi, but clearly it was a covenant. But there's no statement of you shall make a covenant between a man and a woman. It's just assumed that that's a covenant. And so the situation, the type of thing that's occurring is a covenant in that creation covenant. So there's a question: what is that Sabbath piece that God institutes at the beginning of chapter 2? Is that included in all of that? And I think the assumption for most people is that it was. And if then it's part of the creation covenant and it wasn't done away with under Noah, doesn't it then apply to all of mankind, not just the Jews under the Mosaic covenant? Anyway, again, thoughts, because it's not cut and dry. I'm with you, George. It's something to ponder, because there's no place in the New Testament where I can go and I can say, see, there it is. We're supposed to observe the Sabbath. All right. Let's keep moving. Greg and Angela.
What a great controversial topic. Well, yeah, I have so much I could say on this, John. I do agree with you that we should be keeping the Sabbath in some way. I think I disagree that it's Sunday. I think it's probably should be Saturday, but that's not a big issue. But one of the things I think about a lot is Hebrews chapter 4, and George mentioned this, but it says there, therefore, let us fear if, while a promise remains of entering his rest, any one of you may seem to have come short of it. For indeed, we have had good news preached to us, just as they also. But the word they heard did not profit them, because it was not. I think this is the key part of that was that I wanted to bring out, is that God has a promise for us to enter into his rest. And what I believe is that it's still God's day of rest. I mean, I don't think it was 24 hours that he rested. I think he's still resting, because his day of rest is, who knows how long his day of rest is. And I think the world went to pot during his day of rest. And God has stepped in and done many things to rescue mankind. And if you think about Jesus, he healed so often on the Sabbath. And he was criticized by the religious leaders for healing on the Sabbath. And he said, he said, what did he say? He said, my Father is working until now, and I work. Like, he's being criticized for healing on the Sabbath, but he's saying, I'm just doing what I see my Father doing. And then Jesus said another thing. He said, who of you who has like a donkey or an ass that falls into a pit on the Sabbath would not pull it out on the Sabbath? This is why I think it's still God's Sabbath, because this is what he's doing with mankind, with Adam, with Noah, with Abraham, with all of these people leading up to Jesus, and ultimately with Jesus. He's pulling mankind from the pit they've fallen into. And so, yeah, I mean, God is still keeping the Sabbath. He instituted it. I don't know why he would stop doing it. And there's a promise in Hebrews. I mean, Hebrews chapter 4, if you read the entire chapter, it goes on and on quite a bit about entering into God's rest and other things about the day of rest, about whether, Joshua didn't really bring them into rest when he brought them out of Egypt. So there's that. There's I was for a time, for a few years, kind of in the Messianic movement, and that taught me a lot. I mean, I do my best to keep the Sabbath. I don't work on the Sabbath, and I don't ask my helper to work, but I mean, I'm not a stickler like, some of the Jewish people, they're like, oh, you can't switch on a light switch, or you can't run your dishwasher, or you can't
Yeah.
do this. Well, that's making it a burden. Well, God didn't give
Right.
us the Sabbath to be a burden. He gave it to us so we can rest and come closer to Him. And the other thing is it's a way for us to show love to. I mean, Jesus said the most important commandment was to love God and to love your neighbor. And if we're putting our workers to work and never giving them a day of rest, that's not very loving. Or if we're working all the time, 7 days a week, and we don't put any time aside to spend time with God, that's not loving to God. So I have a lot more I could say about that, but I'll let somebody else talk for a while.
All right. Thanks, Greg. Stephen Phyllis.
Yeah, this is a good one. And I echo a lot of the things that Greg just said. At one time, I didn't think about it. But the more I got into the scriptures, and even when we started to say what the gospel of the kingdom is, it's about the restoration of all things the way God originally intended before the fall. And the Sabbath was there before the fall. And in terms of the which day of the week it is, I think we can get into a Western mindset. But in Genesis, no other day had a name except a number, except for the seventh day that was given a name, Shabbat. And but everything, first day, second day, third day, as he created. But the seventh day was given the name, the Sabbath day. And I've also explored some messianic sites about this. And one guy, he was a teacher with a group, and he said that, we can make it complicated, but God just said rest, rest.
Mm-hmm.
And, we try to put a whole lot of other stuff with it, but just rest from your usual labors. And George had mentioned, how can we actually act that out? How can we keep it? And it doesn't, I don't have to worry about hitting a light switch, but, spend time with your family, spend time with your work, just relationship build, and then Jesus showed us it's okay to do good on the Sabbath, because they had gotten so legalistic about it, you couldn't even do good. Jesus showed us it's okay to do good on the Sabbath. And then we have David and the showbread, that's another example that was used. So, I as I've studied more and more, I am resting on the Sabbath now. I'm doing it. And this is kind of new this year.
Now, I'm curious, Phyllis, if you mean Saturday or Sunday?
No, I'm talking Saturday.
Saturday.
And
Okay.
we can worship any day. We can worship, we can study our scriptures, we can do any day. We worship him in spirit and truth. It has nothing to do about which day. We can worship any day. But he did say rest. Just rest. And I think maybe we put more into it, but it's that Western mindset, the council, Constantine, and not just that, even when we were studying about the Maccabean period, one of the things that king went in and did, he changed the Sabbath. He would not allow them to do that, not circumcision, anything that related to the Jews, he tried to take it out. And even Constantine, anti-Semitic, anything that dealt with the Judaism, they tried to eradicate it. And so anyway, just some thoughts.
It was just one thing I would just add to it is that I think that if we can understand the the physical benefits from the spiritual meaning of the Sabbath rest, and not get off on tangents. That what will happen in our lives, that we will see a benefit from resting on the Sabbath. Now, what day you want to do it on is debatable, but as long as you do it and you keep the spirit of it and not so much the letter of it.
Yeah, that's all. These are all very good points and thoughts, and I do think that, you know, the last thing we want to be doing is stoning people because they're not observing the Sabbath the way that we think they should be. And I'm going to go to Donna next, and I'll come back to the Mevelbecks. Go ahead, Donna.
Well, and these are very interesting thoughts, and don't get creeped out now, what I'm going to say.
Uh-oh.
I'm not going to come from scripture. I have a memory when I was a child, I just really loved to go to church, even as a little toddler. And my mother always made sure, had my little white gloves on. This was my thing. We're talking a little infant, that had an awareness of who I want to go see Jesus. I'm going to my church. And my mother always had somebody take me, even if it was my older brother. Every Sunday, I really had my dress, it was my thing. It was my thing at a very early age. So I didn't have any scriptures, but all I want to know is I'm going to see Jesus. I'm going to this church. I'm going to figure it out. From a very 4 years old, I'm at church. I'm going to church, Mom. She dressed me all. I was the only one that did this. So my brother would take me, my aunt would take me, or drop me, or my mother would take, somebody would take me, make sure I didn't get lost and stuff. And I felt real grown up, like I was worshiping God. I was the only one in my family that had this thing about me where I loved church. Then I remember, and I still do on Sunday, it's sort of my little tradition thing that I've always had all my life. Another neat thing that I remember too is I remember my dad saying something about the blue laws were on Sunday, where you couldn't buy booze, not in Connecticut. And the reason that was something to do with God, something to do with God. It had something to do with some religious thing, and it was called the blue laws. And the bars could not open until people came back from church or something. And I remember my dad, say, well, we can't go to my uncle, we can't go to the bars. The bars aren't going to open until after, 1 o'clock because everybody's got to go to church. I thought that was interesting because, it's kind of like Chick-fil-A, they take Sundays off. We can't always in our culture, it's just so weird because half of us have to work. It's just like, is it doable in America? I do believe in giving God honor and time. And I don't have, my thing is Sunday, but I just thought about that when I was a kid. I remember Dad, why can't you do booze why can't you buy any? I don't know if that's still true. I don't think so, but it was in Connecticut when I was a kid, where the bars wouldn't even open, and because it had something to do with church. So that's really interesting, though, that I remember that. That's just something I remember happening, and it had something to do with God and people.
Yeah, I mean that was I think there were still blue laws here in Kentucky when I moved here in 2004. I think most of them aren't around anymore, but
but I thought that was.
I remember when I was a kid, everything was closed on Sunday.
Yeah, you couldn't. In honor of something about the Lord. It was a religious thing. I just wanted to pop in and say that little trivial pursuit there. That's all I wanted to add.
All right, Greg and Angela.
Well, I had a couple other thoughts that I had before, but I just couldn't remember when I was talking earlier. But, George mentioned that, Paul mentions in the Bible that you can observe this day, some observe this day, some choose not to observe a certain day, and it should be up to their conscience. And I can see that in the Bible, there were times where, not that let's say the 10 Commandments didn't apply, but there were times where all those other regulations didn't apply, and they mainly apply when God's people are in a land under God's government. And we can think of when they originally got all those regulations, they were about to enter into the promised land, and then they messed up and had to wait another 38 years until the end of the 40 years. And then Moses gave those regulations again in the book of Deuteronomy. But during that period in the wilderness, nobody was circumcised. And that was one of, well, actually, that was before the law. That was given to Abraham. But if you look in the book of Joshua, you see that once they crossed the Jordan River, all the people, all the men that were born in the wilderness had to be circumcised. So the point is that, there are certain times where God will allow certain regulations to be put on hold. And I think that's probably what's happening in the New Testament when Paul is talking about people keeping certain days. I would assume he's talking about festival days and perhaps other days that the Jews kept, because now all these Gentiles were coming in, and they had a different culture, they had a different experience in life, and just as there was a period of time in the wilderness, we're kind of in a spiritual wilderness right now before the kingdom is instituted. So once the kingdom is instituted, there might be more regulations that apply to us, but for right now, I would assume that because we're not physical Jews, we're not physically in God's promised land, we're not under a godly government. There's a lot of things that we can't keep, but I think we can, for the most part, still keep the Sabbath. And I'm surprised you brought this topic up, but I think it's very interesting, and I think that the Sabbath is actually baked into the chronology of the Bible too, but I won't get into that. But I don't think it. I'm certain of it.
Yeah, one of these days we'll have you get into it.
Yeah, should get into it at some point.
Okay, well, let somebody else talk.
All right, I'm going to read. So Peter had a comment. So Peter,
and sorry, I apologize. It was a bit garbled, John.
oh, you got more than one. Okay, hang on a second. Let me pull it. I'm gonna, for the benefit of the listeners, the later listeners, I'm gonna read this. You mind if I read this whole thing?
Yeah, that's fine. And correct it as you're reading it.
Okay, I'll do that. Let's see. Peter writes, I have wrestled a lot with this one as well. I have reached the place under the new covenant that we should be honoring the spirit and purpose of this commandment as opposed to Old Testament legalism. So the Sabbath under the new covenant is still meant to be kept, but I personally interpret it as the spirit of the Sabbath. We should keep it. The purpose not its purpose not being the legalism of Friday sunset to Saturday sunset of Mosaic law. I see the Sabbath still having several purposes, but observed in new ways under the new covenant. And then he lists off a couple of things here. One, a memorial of the Father's creative work and a test of man's willingness to recognize the Creator's first claim to his time and to the person's time. Number two, it was made for man's benefits, having a regular rhythmic time of rest. I think that's a key one in this whole thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
That when Jesus said it was made for man, not man for it, that it has purpose for mankind, not just Jews, right? That it has purpose for mankind that is good. And that and I think that's a key way to sort of enter in and understand this whole thing. For me, this scripture opposes the legalistic observance. And then Peter quotes Colossians 2:11 through 17. We were circumcised through Christ, died with Christ. I think you're just summarizing, if I'm not mistaken. died with Christ, God made alive together with him, forgiving our trespasses and canceling our debts. No one can pass judgment on you about food/drink, festivals, new moon, Sabbaths. Colossians 2:16-17. Therefore, let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or with regard to a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. So you want to comment about that, Peter?
Yeah, I've had a really mixed fellowship over the years. I've had quite a few Adventists in my fellowship, as well as evangelicals, Pentecostal, real mix. And of course, some of them have had very strong opinions about the Sabbath. And one of them, in fact, had opinions about shadow of things to come. When it comes to festival and new moon, he was talking about the millennium, and he pointed out some scriptures. I think it was in Isaiah, talking about how the nations will observe and celebrate not just the Sabbath, but new moons in ways we're not doing now. Sorry, I've sort of stepped sideways a little bit there. I don't know if you are familiar with some of that.
I am. So, well, first of all, just for anybody who might, not be aware, so there were observances under the Mosaic law beyond the Sabbath. Some of them were festival observances, but there were also a new moon observance in which there would be certain sacrifices that would be made. Like in the normal daily sacrifices, they didn't do wine as part of the sacrifice. Your Bible probably says something like strong drink or something like that. It was probably some sort of form of beer. But on the new moon's observance, that sacrifice included wine. And so there were some differences in terms of that. And certainly the Bible, it's a little difficult to tell whether it's using it metaphorically in Isaiah, or it just means it outright, that there will be these observances. But yeah, those are good points, Peter, because there definitely is stuff going on in Isaiah that's about the time period that we're in now, and there's language there used of things like the Sabbath.
Yeah, so as far as the Sabbath goes for me, honoring the spirit of the Sabbath. I mean, if we want to be really legalistic about it, from where I sit, it's Friday sunset to Saturday sunset. If you want to be really locked down to what the Sabbath was under Mosaic law, we're under the new covenant. So, and Jesus has, correct me if I'm wrong, summarized the 10 commandments with his 2 great commandments: honor and love him, honor and love, serve others in self-sacrificial ways. And I guess that would include the Sabbath, if that's a summary of, if I'm right in saying it's a summary of.
Well, I would think that those two, you just summarizing all of the different commandments and regulations and stuff under those two, obviously the Sabbath has sort of 2 things going on. One is honoring God, and then the other is a rest day for man and the benefits that go along with that. And if you think about it, that matches those 2 commandments, right? Honoring God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, loving him, right? And loving your neighbor as yourself. And certainly if what Jesus said is true, that it was made for man with benefit in mind, then how can you say that you're loving your neighbor as yourself if you're not, if for example, this is the one that bothers me, right? These are the kind of things I think about. I'm like, should I not be going to a restaurant on what I consider the Sabbath on Sunday? And because I'm making somebody work on that day, they have to serve me. And am I loving my neighbor as myself if I'm taking this day of rest, but you don't get a day of rest? When I get a day, I don't know. I'm just like, I don't know what to think about that.
That's why I say I don't ask my helper to work on a Saturday, but on the other hand, I mean, I do go to a restaurant, but I mean, I'm not really making that person work either. They
Just
would be
give
there
them a really
working
big tip. Just give them a
regardless
really
if I
big
was
tip.
there or
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, give bigger tips on the Sabbath.
Oh, bigger tips.
That's how you get. Yeah, you're going to be good. You
Make
know,
up for
God's
it.
not going to be mad at you.
You weren't even allowed to let your animals work on the Sabbath. You had to give
Absolutely.
them the Sabbath off
Yep.
too.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. Let's see how we doing on time here. It's 8 o'clock. So that's probably good for the recording. I'm not sure when I started it, but that's probably right somewhere close to an hour. So I'll sign off on the recording with if you've been listening to this or watching this later, check us out on the internet at allegiancetotheking.org, or we have two addresses go to the same place, A2KA, the number 2K church.org. And check out the website, look at all the resources there, get in contact with us. We'd love to have you join us. The purpose of this ministry, Christian Virtual Fellowship, which is a ministry of Allegiance to the King, is for isolated Unitarians to come and have a church home. And so, you know, we'd love to have you, if you're an isolated Unitarian, we'd love to have you be a part of our church home. So hopefully you'll have you've enjoyed this, and we'd love to hear your comments. You know, give us some feedback on, you know, whether you think that we're heretics or not, and how you observe the Sabbath. And we'd love to hear from you.